going to look at the different variations of how we think Spurs could look under Thomas Frank. We've got 4 different formations to get into, so I'm very much looking forward to see how Tottenham could be lining up under Frank next season. The first formation we're going to look at is a 4-2-3-1.
So we know under Ange, it was the kind of 4-2-3-1. You kind of had Porro. I guess it's a bit hard to say under Ange, blah, 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 because later on in Ange's tenure it was a bit different, right? But if we're judging by his whole tenure, how we kind of saw it overall, it was more of a 4-3-3, Porro and Udogie kind of inverting like that. You had Son and Johnson really far out wide. You had Maddison and the number 8 kind of filling in those spaces. You had a number 6 like this. That was kind of like what we saw under Ange. So under Frank, what I have seen from him is you have a more of a 4-2-3-1 like this. You have Johnson and Son are going to be a bit more kind of higher up and a bit more ability to kind of not hugging to the touchline, a bit more central, a bit more attacking these kind of spaces here, especially it's going to work with Sonny kind of cutting inside. You're going to have what I've seen from his, if we're starting from the back line, what he does with his fullbacks is he kind of has asymmetrical fullbacks, similar to like what we did under Mourinho early on. He'll have one fullback with the ability to kind of bomb on and get to the byline, get forward and really push. And he'll have the other fullback kind of just hanging back a bit, like almost forming like a back three at times. So just hanging back, a bit more reserved, not really getting too far forward. Now, I'm not sure which one's going to be which, because in theory, I guess in theory you would say Porro might be the one to bomb on. Sorry, in theory you would say Porro's the one to hang back.
Yeah, for sure.
Because he can play these, you get the ball, he can play these long passes. Udogie has the fitness to get up and down, right? And he has the legs. So he would be the one going forward. But on the flip side, there could be an argument that Udogie actually, if he hangs back, we know he's a better defender. And if we get obviously transitioned on, you'd much rather have Udogie back there than Porro. And if you had that back three of Porro, Van de Ven, Romero kind of there in and giving Porro obviously the license to get forward, knowing he's got that superior quality as well when he gets to that byline, and knowing that we're going to be less of a threat against us transitionally, you could also say it could be the other way. I'm sure during games and over the season they're going to take turns in it anyway.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. And the thing is with Porro, right? If he's the one to hang back, we know Thomas Frank likes those quick transitions and to attack really quickly in one killer ball. To see, he was top for long balls last season, I think, in the Premier League, or definitely up there. I don't know if he was actually number one. And I think Porro could be absolutely key to that. So I think he will be more. I agree with you. I think they're going to take turns in doing it, but I think it'll be Porro predominantly doing that kind of sitting back role.
Yeah. So that's how the back line as well. Fullbacks are going to be a lot more conventional than they were under Ange Postecoglou. Ange Postecoglou, you kind of saw the fullbacks in these kind of areas, the number 10 a lot, rotational with the winger and maybe in the centre mid. Now you're going to see the fullbacks a lot more conventional, out wide, kind of attacking those kind of spaces. Occasionally popping in here if the winger ever gets dragged out wide, but I think more often than not it's going to be a lot more conventional, and like we've seen under other managers. No more, I wouldn't say no more inverting whatsoever, especially with Porro. He described him as Trent-like, and I think given that he said that, Trent likes to operate in these kind of central areas here, popping around there, and I think he's going to want Porro to do something similar. But I think overall, especially Udogie's not going to be in these areas anymore. I think he's going to be a lot more getting to the byline,
which is more his natural game, isn't it?
100%. And
as well, it'll be kind of music to a lot of Spurs fans' ears, because a lot of Spurs fans over the course of Ange's tenure was like, stop this inverting. It's leaving us too open on the wide areas, and I think that will do the world of good to counteract that. Now, looking at kind of the midfield, I envisage he plays a double pivot now. He usually plays something like a Norgard and a Janel together, or a Jensen. Someone who's a bit more of a passer, like a Jensen, and then a real workhorse. Now,
the problem is we don't really have that workhorse right now. We have Bentancur, who's good and can maybe do that role, but obviously I do think we probably need number 6 in that to kind of partner Bentancur or replace him. Bergvall, I think, is he the guy to maybe be that more passing role, a bit more creative, guy a bit more on the half turn, get a bit into these areas. And Bentancur will be like the Norgard kind of role. Obviously, look, we're judging by how Brentford played last season. It could be very different to what we have. But if we're judging how we fit profile to profile, he can be a bit more like the Norgard kind of role, operating, sweeping up, making. But obviously, in the double pivot, he'd like to see midfielders a lot more closer together. Whereas Vange, we saw kind of a lone 6 here. These two number 8s very high up the pitch, him very, very isolated. I think we're not going to be seeing that under Thomas Frank. They're going to be a lot more compact, a lot more together, and it's going to mean that the numbers, which we saw, to be fair, late in Andrew's tenure in the Europa League, more of a double pivot, and that was much better suited to the kind of players we have. So I think that's what we're going to be seeing in the midfield. Obviously, I do think we could do with signing in there.
Yeah.
I think you could either look at it as we could look at, do we need a kind of destroyer like to replace the 6, or you could even argue, do we need someone who could set the tone in midfield, like with a real creative passer potentially from deep, which we also don't have. So those are 2 question marks, I think, in midfield.
Could Bergvall, kind of get into that role as he develops? Because I think he's got the attributes for it.
Yeah, he's creative. He's very creative, and he's got a good passing range. Is he a controller in that middle? I wouldn't say. I think that comes with time and that comes with patience. And I think at this stage of his career, he's more of a, I need to be doing everything all around the pitch. So if he can coach that into him, I think he's got the ability. But I think that's not his game right now, to be like a pace setter in the centre of the park. So
I guess the most likely player it could be with the profiles that we have in our squad is probably Bentancur.
Yeah, but again, does he have the passing range? I don't know.
He hasn't shown it that often, but I think he does have it in him. But can he do it consistent? I feel like he can pull maybe one out a game, but can he do it consistently throughout the course of a 90 minutes? I'm not sure.
So that's someone maybe we'll have to recruit. What's quite interesting about the number 10 position, obviously Damsgaard plays in this role here. Yeah. Obviously, it's going to be Maddison, we're thinking, for us. So Maddison, a lot of the time this season, obviously playing in that left number 10 role. So a lot of the time spent kind of in this kind of area, trying to create, link up with the winger here. What I've noticed about Damsgaard, I've looked at his heat maps over the season, and he kind of spends equal time on the left and the right. He doesn't just kind of stick to one side.
Yeah.
So I think Maddison's going to have the freedom to kind of operate all around, I think, this kind of final third, where the space is, not married to kind of one side or the other, but kind of given the freedom to operate all around that final third. I think that'll really help him. Yeah. That'll help him find more space. And obviously he does work hard as well.
It's mad to think about, isn't it? That because Ange gives his players so much freedom, but then I'm looking at that, and Damsgaard is pretty much in a free role, right, in the number 10 behind the striker. And you would think like Maddison might actually have more license to do what he wants under Frank than he does under Ange.
Potentially.
Which is mad to think about because of the way you kind of envisage both managers. Like Ange is just kind of like, you kind of think about, just do what you want pretty much, find that space and run into it. Where Frank is a little bit more rigid.
And I've also noticed that Damsgaard seems to spend a bit more time kind of in the final third. While Maddison, obviously we know, likes to drop deep, pick the ball up the centre-backs, drive up the pitch, which I'm sure is not going to exit his game. But from what I've seen from Damsgaard, definitely seems to be operating, in terms of his heat maps, where he's on the ball, a lot more in the final third rather than these deeper positions that Maddison liked to take up last season.
But also Maddison, under Ange, he was dropping deep a lot. Into that midfield, into a very deep position. And I don't think that will happen too often under Frank.
Well, I think the reason being is when he had that single pivot, he needed support, right? So he had to kind of come here and pick up the ball. Whereas now he's got a double pivot, there isn't really that need to do that. He can just hang around here knowing he's got 2 players there behind him, supporting and ready to kind of mop things up. So I think that's going to be an interesting development for James Maddison. I think Maddison could easily thrive under what if you know, given what Damsgaard was doing this season. I think what's it called? Maddison's definitely going to back himself to be thriving, and especially given the fact he's going to be moving a lot around this final third, pop up on the right, pop up on the left. That's going to give him a bit more license to find different pockets of space and not be maybe, I wouldn't say predictable, but kind of just mainly on one side on a game. Now, the striker position is quite interesting. This season, we know Frank has gone for like a Wissa type up front. Obviously, we have Solanke, who's very, very different to Wissa. If you're looking at like profiles, so we know that Frank's front three has been Mbeumo, Wissa, Sade. Sade and Son are very comparable in terms of kind of profile. Like to run in behind, good finishers, get shots off in this kind of area, like to cut inside. Johnson and Mbeumo are very different profiles, I would say. Johnson, obviously we know, likes to attack the back post, good movement, but when he gets into this final third, doesn't really create much, doesn't really create separation between him and his fullback. How often do we see Johnson have a cross and it's blocked? Happens so often, right?
Yeah.
So he also likes, what I've noticed, Frank, is he very much likes inverted wingers. He doesn't like having players on that side play on the same side. Even when Wissa was a winger, he always played on the left. Sade always plays on the left. Mbeumo always plays on the right. He doesn't like wingers to play on the right side. So what does that mean for Johnson? Obviously, we know he wanted Johnson, but did he want him to play on the right? Is that just something he's playing? Are we going to see Johnson more on the left? Are we going to see Johnson maybe where he profiles, in my opinion, which is similar to a Wissa up front? Are we going to see him more in that Wissa role potentially? Because I think Johnson and Wissa have very similar qualities in terms of good strength, good movement, running in behind, pace, good finish. That's kind of similar. So is he going to rebrand him? But then
it's true.
You have Solanke there.
But when Brentford had Ivan Toney, he played Ivan Toney in the 9, who profiles a bit similar to Dom Solanke, and he had Wissa out wide in those moments. So I think with him having Solanke now, I think he'll use him a bit similar to how he used Toney, and then he'll use Johnson out wide for the most part. When we go into other formations, we can talk about Johnson and the differences there. But in this formation particularly, I do still think he'll use Johnson out wide predominantly. Maybe, you know, he can make changes in game and you'll see Johnson centrally in some moments in the game, but I still think he'll prefer with Solanke and use him a bit similar to the way he used Toney.
But I actually think the more I think about it, I actually think we might see a return of Decky more out wide. Like here. I've got a feeling, in terms of the profile to Mbeumo, someone who can very good create separation, very good at good upper body strength, and good in these kind of areas, little dinks to the back post, using his left foot, creating a bit of space and getting a ball in, which Johnson isn't very good at. Decky might be the guy who actually can play this role a lot better, because under Ange, we know he's kind of there, stuck out wide, asked to kind of beat players, get to that byline, cut it back. We know that's not Decky's role. But if Decky is playing more like Mbeumo, kind of a bit higher up, kind of asked to kind of hang there a bit, get the ball, just get to this kind of area, create separation, and either go for a shot or a little dink to the back post. Isn't that much more his game?
Yeah, 100%. And you look at it, it'll be a lot more in line to the way Conte used him in his first 6 months, where he really flourished when he first came. So I'm not against that at all. And I was very much against Ange using him as the winger in his kind of system. But if you can get back to that Decky in the roles that he was doing under Conte, particularly when he first came, I think he can flourish in it. And it's good kind of like you'll be able to switch him around, use him in the 10 when Maddison needs to go off, and then use him on the right and in rotation with whoever it may be, Johnson or Odebert, whoever plays on the right in that moment in time. But I think he's much more adept at playing the winger or the inside forward system under Frank, for sure.
And also what I think is going to help Solanke here is if Decky is kind of up there a lot and he's asked to kind of whip balls in as well. But if does also something that he's also quite good at, which is kind of holding the ball up over here, if he allows Porro a bit of time to get forward, what Frank is very good at is, I feel like under Ange, we would get to this kind of area, and then we'd obviously aim to get to the byline, do that cut back, and always look for that. Always get these wingers in one-on-one situations, try and get to the byline and get a cut back, or look for one of the midfielders in here to try and get into the box kind of thing. That was like the first port of call. And if all else failed, you kind of then give it to the fullback around this area, who then would cross it into a packed area and a settled defence. Whereas what I've noticed about Frank and what he likes to do is he likes his wingers get to this position, hold it up a bit, cut it back to the fullback, and immediately whip it in very quickly. No waiting, no hesitation. Get it to the fullback, whip it in.
Yeah.
And that's like almost the first port of call. That's like the first thing he tries to do, rather than it being the last choice, and rather it being kind of, if all else fails, you cross it in. It's kind of like, get it in quickly. And I think that is going to help Solanke,
100%.
who we know was kind of maybe didn't get the service a lot, didn't get the deliveries. And if he gets a lot more early delivery and gets defenders on the back foot, and as well, I think a main thing is strikers make a lot of runs, don't they? They like to get across defenders. They like to make their runs when they see things happening out wide. And when you keep delaying that ball going in, it just makes you a lot easier to get picked up. And if you're whipping it in early, once he makes that movement, very similar to, if you remember that goal we got against Newcastle, one of the very, very rare times he whipped it in early and he got that goal, diving header.
Yeah.
Because he makes that movement and it's very hard to stop once Solanke's got a run on you, because he's strong. But once you keep delaying it and you allow the penalty area to get packed and settled, all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder for him to get that chance.
Yeah, and I think that was a lot of people's, massive gripe with the Ange system. You've brought in Solanke, who's really good in the air, who was really good in the box the year before for Bournemouth, scoring 19 goals. I think Frank will get him in, extremely high XG positions in the box, and like you said, spam crosses into him. He'll get a lot of goals in a Frank system, using his head and playing to his strengths, essentially. Like, we just never played to his strengths really last season, and I think Frank, will definitely do that.
One other thing to talk about is the goalkeeper. We've got Vicario there right now, as you can see. I do think he'll start the season as our number one. He is our number one. He's part of the leadership group. I think obviously he's a good goalkeeper. We know about Vicario, but whereas under Ange, kind of how you'd see the kind of goalkeeper set up is you'd have like Romero, Van der Ven here. You'd have kind of a Doggy and Porro kind of inverting. You'd have a midfielder there. So his role very much was basically just play these little passes here, and that would be the build-up. Whereas under Frank, it's going to be a lot more spread. You're going to have the double pivot there. You're going to have the fullbacks back out wide. You're going to have the Romero and Van der Ven a bit higher. So what you're going to have is Vicario is going to be asked to play a lot more of these kind of passes out wide, and also a lot more of these passes into Solanke, like that.
Though,
a
like,
lot more of that.
Those passes that you talk about to Porro and Doggy, Vicario was actually doing that last season, and it is actually quite underrated at those kind of dinks towards the fullbacks.
He was decent at it.
It's the one up to Solanke that I just don't have confidence in him doing.
So I wouldn't be surprised if Vicario continues to maybe have some struggles in that he's had a build up, if maybe Kinski does get his opportunity at some point.
How long do you reckon that takes? Because, like, we've seen the goalkeepers that Frank has had, right? He developed David Raya into one of the best ball-playing goalkeepers in the Premier League. Mark Flecken came in and, obviously Raya did it better, but still Flecken did it to a very high standard. Now Flecken's gone. Keller has come in, who's also decent with his feet. How long do you reckon it takes? How long will he give Vicario? Because Vicario is for sure starting the season as number one.
Mm-hmm. Probably. Look, he's got. It's hard to say, If he's getting howler after howler, then he'll be pretty quick. But if he's not improving that ability that we need on the his ball playing ability to a certain point, maybe November time. I don't know.
It's a balancing act, though, isn't it? Because what Vicario is really good at, Kinski is not so good at in terms of his shot stopping. So you can't have a goalkeeper that's making blunders week after week. Like, you know, we've seen Kinski when he's come in, he's letting a few easy goals as of yet. So it depends what Frank is going to value more.
Agreed. All I'm saying is if I'm looking at Flecken and Raya, who are they more closer to? Are they closer to a Kinski or a Vicario? I would say Kinski.
Yeah, but they're both very good at shot stopping as well.
Yeah, but Kinski's 21. He's young.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
he's going to improve that.
Yeah,
he's going to improve that. That's going to come.
But will next season come too soon for that? Is what I'm trying to get.
Maybe. Who knows? We'll have to, you know, I don't know. I'm just saying. I think Kinski is more of a Frank kind of goalkeeper than Vicario.
No, I agree with that.
I wouldn't be surprised, and maybe at some point Kinski does get an opportunity next season, and maybe if he takes it, he could then become our number one, because he's going to be a lot more playing. I think he's much more adept at playing these kind of passes, with much better passing technique. Whereas I feel like Vicario still kind of, yes, he's good at those dinks. He's still good at those dinks, but that's what he does. He dinks them. He would play them like an outfielder, like right into feet, like drill them.
Yeah.
Vicario still doesn't have that. He's still looping things. He's still dinking them, making it harder to control. Means the player might have to stop in their stride, whereas he can really play it into feet. He can play it directly into Solanke's chest. Whereas Vicario's still not at that level yet, playing at the back.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, you know, the way it's going to work out is Kinski will get the cup games, and it's up for him to really prove his worth in those cup games. And if he does do that, you never know what can happen.
And just quickly touch on the centre-backs. What I've noticed as well, looking at the heat maps of Collins and who else have I? Pinnock, is that Collins will basically have a lot more license to step into these roles.
Except Vandenberg.
Or Vandenberg, yeah, actually Vandenberg this season. Collins will have a lot more license to step in here. You look at his heat map. He's obviously hanging back a lot as well, but he has a lot more license to step into the opposition half. Whereas this defender, Vandenberg, will exclusively just stay here. He pretty much won't cross the halfway line. He'll just be there. And obviously that's kind of perfect for like Romero and Van der Ven, if we can keep Romero that is. Or even Danso, to be honest, because Danso is that kind of profile as well. So I think that is kind of well set up for kind of how Frank likes his centre-backs.
When Brentford are kind of like in the ascendancy, when they're playing this system, they're the favourites, they're trying to control the possession of the ball, they're pressing high up the front, they're playing out the back. How high is the line? Is it like that kind of high?
Yeah, it's quite aggressive. It is very aggressive. And also what he likes, what I also kind of think Udogie could potentially be the one that hangs back, is because he likes physicality in that back line. And when he presses high, he kind of forces the opposition to go long, and he likes his defenders being very aerially dominant. And obviously, if they're facing Udogie, Van der Ven, obviously Porro's going to have to hang back at times as well. But if he forces them to go long, he wants these guys to be winning those duels. And obviously Collins is very dominant in the air, and I think Udogie can be quite dominant as well if he hangs back. But he likes to suffocate the opposition when he's the favourite, press them high, and force the opposition to go long, and win the ball back there and make sure they got no out ball, essentially. So
I think Frank is going to love this squad. With obviously, you need some more players in there to kind of complete it and fill the gaps. But the players that we've got in this squad, I really think Frank's going to adore them.
One other, obviously, formation. So that's kind of the 4-2-3-1, how I kind of see it going. Albeit, you know, maybe he could even use Son up front, maybe sometimes, could use Johnson up front instead of Solanke, if he wants to go maybe a bit more counter-attacking, maybe away at a City. He maybe doesn't use Solanke, just goes guys who are going to attack the space, like a Wissa.
Yeah, I think away at a City, he'll go 3 at the back.
So that's the formation the season before last that he really liked to use. So he would basically be a 3-5-2. So basically what you would do is let's take away Kulusevski and let's put in a Danso. How it will kind of look is fullback, this Romero, Danso, Porro, but very similar to how he plays when he plays 4 at the back. It's kind of asymmetrical. One of the wing backs is given real license, like a Keane Lewis Potter would be on the left.
Yeah.
He was almost like a winger, basically, barely even coming back that much. And the other wing back, still quite advanced, but not as advanced, would hang around these kind of areas, still be a bit more reserved. You would have kind of like a 3, like Bergvall. You got Maddison there, and then you'd have Solanke, and you'd have a Son, which would be a Tony and a Wissa, or Tony and Mbuemo up front in these kind of areas, and you'd basically play a 3-5-2. That's how he played a lot of his season before last when they finished 16th, and they were quite more pragmatic. He played that kind of role.
In this kind of formation, do you see it being more of a Maddison and Bergvall, or do you reckon it could be like a Maddison and Kulusevski? Do you reckon Kulusevski can play in one of those middle 3 roles in a 3-5-2?
Potentially, but judging by what I saw from him at Brentford, it'd probably be even more like a Bergvall and a Sarr, like that. Sorry, Sarr and a Maddison, 2 kind of real workhorses who can cover a lot of ground.
He's a workhorse, though, isn't he?
Yeah, but I know he's a workhorse, but someone who can cover a lot of ground, make a lot of tackles, and really cover these areas for when these fullbacks go flying forward, because that was kind of their role, these midfielders, is to really put in a lot of work. And even actually, he didn't play with the 10, to be honest, for a lot of these games. He would basically take out like a Maddison and could even put in Basuma there. If we think maybe Basuma's leaving, but a midfield 3 would kind of look like that a lot. And these midfield 3 will be like Janelt, Norgard, and Norgard and Jensen. It will kind of be a midfield 3 like that. And Damsgaard wouldn't really even get a look in. And these 3 would basically cover a lot of these areas and obviously be very compact, be looking to catch out the opposition, win the ball up in these kind of areas, play it very quickly to these wing backs, or more importantly, very direct to these attackers, who a lot of the time, because there's 2 up front, up against 2 centre backs, looking to get them in behind, looking to play early balls into space, and especially against teams like City and Liverpool, who like to commit a lot of risk, right? They would make Wissa and Tony would very much be making those runs in behind, and these 3 midfielders' job is basically just be a bit simple, make it very simple, win the ball directly into the attack, and that's that they'd be very, very direct. And these centre backs will be very compact together, but also with the ability to kind of step out and defend those wide areas as well. And that's kind of the 3-5-2 I saw a lot. But I envisage if it was at Spurs, maybe a Bergvall comes in instead of like a Basuma, and so you just have that little bit more quality there, something like that, or maybe even a Maddison as well, depending on the opposition. And that's kind of how you can see. And obviously he had Ivan Toney there to hold the ball up, and actually more importantly to flick balls on. They would go long to Ivan Toney, and he would basically flick balls on to Mbuemo and Wissa with his head and get them running in behind. And Son, or maybe, who could be quite good for that kind of role, would be a Brendan Johnson.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Running onto things, and running in behind. I think this could be a really good role for him in a 3-5-2. If we play that formation.
Do you reckon Johnson and Son together will just be a bit too lightweight?
Yes and no. I think
because you could have like the dual threat.
You could do. I don't think it necessarily would be. I think if we are losing the game and the opposition is sitting a bit deeper, then potentially. But while the game is level and they're coming at us and they're trying to win and they're committing risk, they're leaving 2 men back or 3 men back. I don't think it's too lightweight. I think they could easily be running in behind and causing lots of problems.
You should look at a formation that he deployed a couple of times last season, which was the 4-3-1-2. Have you seen that formation? He had 3 kind of like workhorses in the middle of the park with a number 10 in Damsgaard behind 2 strikers with a flat back 4. I thought that was a really interesting tactical variable that he did last season.
A 4-3-1-2.
Yeah.
How often did he deploy that?
I'm not sure how many times it was, but I remember seeing him use it.
A bit like this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so, well, to be fair, we kind of deployed that under Ange. I think it was against RZ, not 4-3-1. Well, yeah, I think it was against RZ. We deployed something fairly similar, like at home. It was more of a diamond formation. Or maybe it was Frankfurt.
So against Arsenal, right, when they played Arsenal, they had a midfield 3 of Janelt, Norgard and Yarmouk. They had Damsgaard in the 10, and then they had Mbeumo and Wissa up top. I mean, they ended up losing the game, but, you know, still, I thought it was a really interesting tactical setup that could actually suit this squad quite well.
Yeah, because we've got a lot of good central players, a lot of guys who can also do a lot of running like Sarr. And I'm assuming off the ball, it probably looked a bit more like, when it was in defensive position, it probably looked a bit more like this, like a 4-4-2, Damsgaard off the left. And then as soon as we get the ball, you get those I think he's trying to basically make, he's trying to give it, dominance, outnumber the opposition in the middle.
Yeah, the kind of average positions were the midfielders and the attackers all very much crowded in the central areas of the pitch, because obviously he's playing in Arsenal, right? But Lewis Potter-Keane was very much out on his own on that left-hand side, patrolling all the way down the pitch.
Playing left back.
Yeah. And then who was their right back? The right back on the day was Roslev. So Roslev was a bit deeper.
Roslev, he was on hanging back.
Yeah, exactly.
So almost became a bit like a free. And then you got real dominance in those central area, and it made it very hard for Arsenal. Was that the one
so
they
basically
drew 1-1?
that was like the kind of average positions.
Is that when they drew 1-1?
No, they lost 3-1 that game.
There was a game they drew 1-1 at the Emirates, didn't they?
Yeah, they drew 1-1 at the Emirates. When they drew 1-1 at the Emirates, they played it says a 4-4-2.
But if you look at the average position, it was probably...
If you look at the average position...
Because it was 4-4-2, but was Damsgaard off the left, right?
What number's Damsgaard?
24.
Damsgaard didn't play.
Ah.
It was Jan-Elt Norgard in the middle. Oh, Damsgaard was there. It looked like he played, on the left wing.
So that's what I'm saying. Off the ball, that's probably where he was. And then once he comes on, he's kind of moving more centrally.
I mean, it pretty much was like a 4-4, the way they lined up in the average positions.
4 up front.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which is pretty crazy to go to the Emirates like that.
Yeah. And draw.
Yeah. But look, having said all this, what we're doing at the moment, or theorising how we're going to play, we're literally basing it off how his Brentford team played. And we know that Frank has said it himself, he bases the way he plays off the players he has. So this could all be very mute. This could all be, he could come up with a completely different formation, how he wants to play this Tottenham squad.
It's true, but actually when we're talking about this and considering all these different formations that he's looked at Brentford, you look at our players, and I feel like they do profile quite well in these systems.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also obviously he's played a lot of 3-4-3, which is you got let's say you got Danso coming in, you probably take the Maddison out. You have Johnson on the right, Solanke on the. So you got Bergvall there. Let's say you got 2 here, and then probably take out Bergvall, put on Son, and then you've got a good 3-4-3 as well, which he's deployed quite a lot at his time. Wissa was very much on the left. It was like Tony up front and Mbeumo on the right. And also, we know that Bentancur and Sarr have both played that role under Conte, and especially Bentancur was very good in that role, in a 3-4-3.
Yeah.
I do think you'd have to partner him properly in this position with a Sarr, just so you have that legs in the middle. Maybe a Bergvall, you can get away with it. I don't think you can get away with a Maddison there. You'd probably have to put a Sarr there, or another defensive midfielder next to a Bentancur. But we know that role, really, Bentancur can thrive in that role.
And if Romero was to leave this summer, and Dragoshin comes in, you'd probably envisage Danso moving to the middle, or Dragoshin goes into the middle, but that's still a really competent back three.
Yeah. You'd probably say... I'll probably keep Dragoshin there, because I think Danso, is probably a bit more comfortable in wide areas than Dragoshin. So you'd probably just keep Dragoshin in the middle.
Because I think did Romania play that back three in the Euros? Wasn't Dragoshin on the right, or Dragoshin was just on the right of a back four? I can't remember.
I can't remember. for Romania. Even in a 3-4-3 though, maybe again it will probably be if Kulusevski's fit. I also think Tell, if we do re-sign him, is quite well suited to this.
He's very
left wing
similar
role.
profile to Sade.
Yeah, like very much like a guy who likes to cut inside, and you can finish things off and do stuff there. So I do think Tell is actually maybe a better signing under Frank than he would have been under Ange.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think if we do re-sign Tell, him, Solanke, and Solanke, I think, can be two proper winners of Frank coming into Tottenham. I really believe that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so those are kind of a lot of, and obviously also he does play a 4-3-3 as well, maybe against teams that he does want to play a back three against, better teams, but still needs a bit more steel. Can take away that number 10, can kind of put in a Saar. Well, he's got Saar there. Put in maybe a Bergval, and you have like a 4-3-3, but almost all in a line here.
Yeah.
Where's Berg? Not Kulusevski, Bergval. Like that. And then you kind of almost got them all three of them very hard working and very compact. And I think that's going to be a big difference for Frank compared to him and Ange. Is I don't think we're going to be seeing the gaps in the midfield that we had under Ange, where there was just big gaps and a lot easier to kind of cut through the middle. But I think Frank's going to make it a lot more compact and a lot more difficult to kind of get in between that midfield.
And to give you an idea of like how often he actually changes up his formation and tactics game to game, it's actually mad. Like I'm just going through his games now, looking at Frank, what he's deployed in the big games. And it's hard to find two of the same formation. It really is. He really comes up with individual plans for each and every game. I mean, first or second game of the season, he went to Anfield, deployed a 4-4-2. Then he went to the Etihad and played a 3-5-2. Then he went to the Emirates, like I said, and played a 4-4-2 as well. But he's deployed so many different formations over the course of the season. It's actually mad. Yeah,
and that's one of his biggest strengths. He's very tactically flexible. He changes the formation mid-game a lot and game to game and depending on the opposition. And so all these different formations are all different ways you're likely to see Tottenham kind of line up, I think, next season. It's going to be very interesting to see what his preferred formation, how he profiles his squad. Does he think we're more squad better suited to a back three? Does he stick with a back four? I reckon for the start, he'll stick with the back four because I think this season he moved to a back four for Brentford because he wanted to be more attacking, and I think he's going to do that with Tottenham as well.
I don't know if it's about like just sticking to something. I just feel like he's just going to come up with plans for each and every specific game. I think maybe initially he might just doesn't want to upset the kind of routine and apple cart, but as he progresses into the season, I think you'll start seeing a variation of all different kind of formations.
I know, I'm just saying, I think at the start, I think his main formation, the one that you're going to see in most games, I think is going to be a back four.
Which was the most that we saw from Brentford last season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the same for Tottenham.
Yeah. There is like this kind of narrative around Frank that I saw when we were first linked with him saying, he's a defensive manager. But he's not. I mean, his way of playing football is playing at the back, pressing from the front, high-octane attacking football. That is like his kind of first philosophy. And he had to kind of find different ways to get results with the Brentford side just coming into the Premier League.
If you see how he played in the Championship,
it
was very free-flowing. And I know it's a Championship, but it was very much attacking. They played some of the best football, I think people said, in the Championship.
Yeah.
And look, it is the Championship again. It's harder to do that in the Premier League. And look, he had to adapt in the Premier League, and he did. He did it successfully, got them to mid-table, and he's kept them there.
Yeah.
And that's really, really impressive. But obviously, he's going to be asked to play a lot more of an attacking brand at Tottenham. I think, is he capable of it? I think from what we've seen at Brentford, he's definitely capable of attacking football, but doing it at the high level with more pressure. We'll have to wait and see. But he's definitely not a defensive manager, I agree with you. When he plays these games, like against City and Liverpool, when you watch them play, they don't settle for a draw.
No.
They don't. They go for the win. I remember when they won at the Etihad, they were drawing 1-1, and even though they were under pressure for a lot of the game, they still kept trying to score goals. And in fact, I think Ivan Toney scored a last-minute winner when and to win that game. Whereas other managers, like let's say if it was Deitch or whatever, they maybe don't even go forward. They probably just settle for the draw, and they just keep everyone back. Whereas Frank, he's not a manager that settles for draws. He's not a manager he's pragmatic in the sense that he likes to keep his team protected and wants to give them the best chance of getting a result. So he can be pragmatic in that sense, but he's not pragmatic like he'll go into a game saying, we want to draw. He always tries to find ways to win.
The amount of times I watched Brentford last season, they go 1-0 down early, or, they let in a goal, and you're thinking, all right, this is going to be a defeat for Brentford, but they never rest on their levels. They never know when they're beaten, that Brentford side last season. How many times did we see them come back when you thought they had lost the game? Like they had a poor first half, and then second half they just come out and absolutely skin the opposition. We saw it so many times. So I think that's also something to be really excited about next season, the belief that Frank instills in his team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the togetherness, which we saw at Brentford, and even in games where I remember one thing, it's weird, but it stood out to me. They were losing, they were playing, I think, at St. James's Park. They were losing 3-0. But they just kept going. And I was like, and they just kept creating chances. They kept causing problems. And even though the game was dead, they just kept asking questions. And they didn't just let the game die down. They never just gave up. And I think they got a consolation in the 90th minute and got a goal. But I was watching it thinking that was reward for them always not stopping. It wasn't just like a goal against the run of play where they just got a consolation goal. It's because they just kept putting pressure on Newcastle and kept asking questions.
You know what's a really good example of that is their game against Manchester City this season when they drew 2-2. Because Man City, they go 2-0 up in the second half. It's 0-0 at half-time. Man City go 2-0 up with about 15 minutes to go or something. And then suddenly, there's this Brentford onslaught that you've never seen before. They could have won that game 3-4, 5-2. It ended up being a draw. They scored 2 goals. But the amount of chances that Brentford created in that game against the Man City side I was just blown by that game. I remember clearly watching it and I was thinking, wow, this Brentford side is serious.
And
do you remember which game I'm talking about?
Yeah, this season.
Yeah.
I remember it. So I think he's going to instill that in the team. He's going to make us harder to beat. He's going to maybe get definitely different profiles out of the attackers that we've got. I think it's going to help Solanke with a bit more early crossing. I think it's going to help Son getting closer to goal rather than being hugging the touchline. It's going to help Decky being in that kind of right half space on the edge of the area rather than always trying to ask to beat players and get to the byline and cut back. I think it's going to help the midfield create a bit more compactness and having big gaps. And I think it's going to help the defence having a bit better structure when we're under pressure rather than maybe the defensive structure we've had under Andrew when there's big gaps with the fullback. I think having those asymmetrical fullbacks should help us as well. So there's a lot to be positive and excited about when it comes to how we think he's going to set up.
Yeah.